Hey, fellow spooks, how are you? I hope you're doing amazing. My name is Rachel, and this is Rachel Unabridged, where I talk about books and horror. Today I'm going to go over what I read in January and let you guys know what I thought of everything I read. So let's jump in because I read like 16 or 17 books this month, which is wild for me, but a lot of them were manga, so they were pretty short. I'm just going to like bunch all of them in since they were all from the same series. If you watched my December wrap up, you probably know what series it is. Last month, I read 12 ebooks, listened to one audiobook, and then read 3 physical books off my TBR shelf. The first book that I read was A Sliver of Darkness by C.J. Tudor. This came out in November of last year, I'm pretty sure. It was an arc that I got from NetGalley, and I gave it 3.5 stars and rounded it down to 3 stars for Goodreads. This book was a short story collection full of all kinds of different types of horror stories. It was really fun. I enjoyed the collection. There were a lot of really good stories in it, and there were a few that didn't really hit well for me. They were just kind of okay, maybe like fell a little flat, but I still think that the collection was really good. There was all kinds of different types of horror in there. There was like apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic. There were eldritch abominations, and then there was like the monstrous nature that can sometimes take root in humankind. So a lot of really interesting stuff to read. I think that it's one of those collections where there's such a variety of topics and themes that pretty much anyone will be able to find something that they like or that interests them. One of my complaints about this book was that the author had story notes at the beginning of the stories where she kind of talked about how the story came into being and how she developed it, like where she got the idea. And I love story notes, but I want to read the story first before I read the notes. So at first I didn't realize that the notes were going to kind of give away so much of the story for me. So I read a few of them, and then finally I just stopped and started saving them to read after I already read the story. So if you're like me and you want to kind of go into these stories blind, I would recommend completely skipping the story notes until after you finished each story, and then go back and see her thoughts and stuff about the story, because it is really interesting to hear about all of that just after you already know what the story is about, right? My personal favorite stories from this collection were Runaway Blues, The Lion at the Gate, Final Course, and The Completion. So if you've read this book, definitely get down in the comments and let me know which story was your favorite. The next book I read was The Spite House by Johnny Compton. This was an arc that I got from NetGalley, and this book is set to come out, I believe, February 7th of this year. It was a supernatural horror, and I gave it 3.25 stars and rounded it down to 3 stars on Goodreads. I talked about this book a little bit in my January TBR video, but basically it's about this man, Eric, and his 2 daughters. They're kind of on the run, and out of desperation, he takes this job investigating a haunted house. This book had a really great setup. I got really invested in the family really early on, and I couldn't wait to kind of learn about them and learn what their situation was and why they were on the run. The author did a really good job kind of sprinkling these breadcrumbs around, causing the reader to ask questions and then kind of anticipate what the answers would be. So I really, really enjoyed that aspect. Additionally, I really liked the relationship the 2 sisters had, because I feel like sometimes it's more common for sisterly relationships to be depicted in a kind of negative way, where they don't get along, or they just don't really have a great relationship. But the sisters in this book really did. It was really cute and wholesome, and I really, really enjoyed that part of it. Unfortunately, the story kind of started to drag for me. There were a lot of POV jumps in the story, and there were jumps to these characters that were kind of inconsequential, and I didn't really feel like it was justified to have a chapter with like just their point of view. So I didn't really like that aspect of it, and additionally, I felt like there were a few places where there were just these huge information dumps that kind of felt inorganic to the story, and kind of also rehashed things that as a reader you probably would have already noticed and picked up on. So it kind of felt like there was some hand holding going on that kind of bloated the book and made it a little bit less enjoyable, I guess, than it could have been. I would still definitely recommend it though if you enjoy haunted house stories. There were a lot of themes of like family bonds and generational trauma, so if you enjoy reading about those things, then this might be something cool for you to check out. I also read Come Tumbling Down by Seanan mcguire. This is book 5, I think, in the Wayward Children series. I started reading the series last year, and I'm trying to get caught up with it this year. So it's my goal to kind of like read 1 or 2 of these books every month or so until I get caught up. I think I'm about halfway now. But I'm not going to talk too terribly much about this book in particular because it would kind of spoil the series. But I would highly recommend this series. It is an urban fantasy about like portals to other worlds. These portals like that open up for specific people. There's supposed to be just like all of these worlds, and every person has a world that is like perfect for them. So it's kind of like about these kids who are sort of outcasts for reasons that are either like family issues, you know, like family trauma, or just kind of societal rejection, things like that. They don't feel at home in the world, and then they're given the opportunity to go to these fantasy worlds where they can be accepted and live happily. So I would really recommend this series. I gave this book 5 stars, and I think I've given almost every book in the series 5 stars at this point. I think there was one that was a 4-star read, but they're all really, really good, so I would recommend them. I also read Ancient Images by Ramsey Campbell. This was an arc that I got on NetGalley. This story was actually published back in 1989 or 1990. I've seen several different dates, so I'm not 100% on when the like first release was, but I got this arc because they're doing a re-release of this story, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is a horror story about a film. It's a lost film that's a Karloff Lugosi kind of horror situation, and a woman, Sandy, is trying to find this film and then also find out why it was that the film was suppressed in the first place. There's all kinds of like mysterious circumstances surrounding the making of this film, and we kind of get to explore all of that as the story progresses. I really, really enjoyed the atmosphere of this story. The author was really, really good about like racking up the tension and all of the suspense. It was just very, very well done. I was also really surprised because I guess I kind of have a little bit of an expectation about older books that there's probably going to be a lot of tropes or other sort of story beats that I'll have seen before, especially like a book from the 80s. But I was actually pleasantly surprised by the way that this story was able to subvert some of my expectations. Like some of it played out according to, you know, how I kind of assumed it was going to, but there were a lot of like really pleasant surprises throughout, so I really, really enjoyed that aspect. And of course, because it is about, you know, Karloff and Lugosi and a film that they made together, this book has a lot of classic horror references and stuff that I thought was really, really fun and interesting. And it also takes place in the UK during the 80s, which apparently there was some kind of horror panic going on around that time, and Like we had the Satanic Panic during the 80s here, so I guess that was like their counterpart. I had never heard about it before. I didn't really know the details, but since this story is set in that time period, there was a lot of really interesting like information and a look at what it was like over there at the time, especially in like the horror community and stuff, and I thought that was all like super interesting to read. On the downside, this book definitely had a huge saggy middle. It started out great and it ended great, but there was just a lot of stuff in the middle, a lot of the character kind of driving around. There was a bit of like an investigative theme to the book. So as she was traveling around the country collecting information, I felt like the author included way too many like boring car rides in the narrative that kind of like slowed it down and had me sort of like skimming at parts. So that would be why this book got a lower rating. Additionally, the main character, Sandy, was just not like super well developed. She was all right, but not great, I guess, as far as main characters go. And all of the minor characters were pretty bland. They all just kind of bled together, and I did not really have any attachments to anyone in this book. So there's that. But honestly, with those kind of negatives, I still really enjoyed the book, and I would definitely recommend it just as kind of a fun, spooky kind of read. Like I said, the atmosphere was really good. So if you're looking for something that's plot driven and doesn't necessarily like wow in terms of characters, and you don't mind that, then this could still be a good read for you. I also listened to The Graveyard Book. I actually have a physical copy, so I'm going to hold this up instead of popping images on the screen since I have the opportunity. But I absolutely love Neil Gaiman. He is one of my favorite authors. And I had a deal on Audible where I paid like $7 for 3 months and got to pick audiobooks that I wanted. So I collected a whole bunch of Neil Gaiman audiobooks because I just love the way that his voice sounds when he's narrating his stories. It's like very soothing. So me and my husband listened to this for like 30 minutes before bed for like the whole month of January. Managed to finish it. It was only 8 hours long or so. As you can see, it's not a super long book, but it is a great story. I would kind of describe it as a spooky fantasy and like supernatural book. It is about a boy named Nobody Owens. After his family is murdered when he's a toddler, he kind of wanders away and ends up in the local graveyard, and the spirits there decide to protect and raise him. I absolutely adore the spooky vibes in this book. It is a perfect read for like Halloween or just spooky season in general. I generally start spooky season in September, and then it is not finished until November, like Thanksgiving, and I'm like, those 3 months are the spooky season. So I would definitely recommend reading this during that time period. It is just so good and has such good vibes. The characters are amazing. They're just like so many fun personalities in this story, so highly recommend this. I also read The Shuddering by Ania Ahlborn. This was a group read for the horror group that I'm joined to on Goodreads. This is kind of a creature feature horror, and I gave it 3.25 stars. The basic premise of it is a group of friends go out into the mountains of Colorado to a cabin for the weekend or an extended weekend, some situation like that, and then they find themselves being hunted by these creatures. This book had a great start. I was really having fun with it when I first started reading it, but unfortunately the characters kind of dragged it down for me. They just were not very likable, and the book was kind of bloated with their melodrama and their like relationship issues, and unfortunately just too much of the book was dedicated to that for my taste. So it really kind of sucked because everything else about the book was really good. The writing was really good. The creatures and the scenes that they were in were like really amazing. They were described like so well. I feel like I had this like crystal clear image in my head of what they looked like and what was happening. It was kind of a very cinematic feeling book. In a book that's, kind of a creature feature where you expect for some people to die, it feels a little bit like cheating to make them all unlikable, and I always kind of feel like it detaches me from any kind of emotional impact that the deaths might have. So I really do prefer for the characters to be likable so that, when they die and they're just like ripped away from me, I'm kind of like, emotionally impacted by it and everything, which like maybe that sounds a little bit masochistic, but that's just, I like to have that emotional impact in my books. But as I said, the writing was really good. The creatures were really good. The story itself, characters and their drama aside, was really well done. So I still would recommend this book if, interpersonal melodrama doesn't bother you in a story, or if it's something that you actually like, then this could be a book that you would like. Additionally, I would really recommend reading it during the winter months because it does take place in Colorado in the winter, so it has these really good like wintry isolation vibes. So definitely put that on your list for winter if you decide that you want to read it. I think that it really has these amazing vibes that you'll enjoy. I also managed to get around to What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. I have sung T. Kingfisher's praise on my channel already before, and in my January TBR video, I had mentioned wanting to get around to this if I had the opportunity, and thankfully I did. And it's very short, only like 165 pages. So I was able to knock it out in one day, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is a retelling of Follow the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. Our main character is Alex, and they receive a letter from one of the ushers talking about their sickness, and one of them is dying. So Alex rushes to the house to assist them and see what is happening, and the story kind of goes from there. It has really, really good like gothic horror vibes, and of course it has T. Kingfisher's usual style where she's kind of comedic in her delivery while also just being terrifying. So I really, really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. I also read Reflections on Healing by Rachel Oates. This is actually a YouTuber who I've been watching for a while now. She does like a variety of topics, but one of the things that she's really well known for is her like poetry criticism videos, and this is actually her debut collection that she released. I was really excited to read it because she had shared some of her poetry on her channel before, and I thought that it was very like raw and emotional, like very well crafted. So I got her collection when it came out. A lot of the themes of this collection are toxic relationships and abuse, as well as the healing and hope that comes with leaving a situation like that. So I gave it 4.5 stars. I would recommend checking it out if you enjoy poetry, and especially poetry with those types of themes. I also got around to reading Firefly Legacy Edition, Book 1. I am a huge fan of the Firefly universe. I loved the TV show growing up, up until they canceled it. So I really wish that I had read these comics sooner, because this collection was released in 2018. So it would have been so nice to be able to revisit the world of Firefly and all of the characters sooner. If you have not seen the TV show, basically it's about Captain Malcolm Reynolds and his ragtag crew committing petty crime. But there's a lot more to it than that. The world building in this series is fantastic. There is just like a lot of history to it. It just feels really well developed and lived in, and all of the characters are also like very carefully crafted and well developed. They are just amazing, morally gray characters. So I would highly recommend checking out Firefly and also reading the comics, because they fill in a lot of the character backstories that we didn't get to see before the show was canceled. So highly recommend. I gave it 5 stars. The last couple days of January, I spent cramming in as many volumes of My Hero Academia as I could. This is a superhero manga series by Horikoshi Kouhei, and I think that I read 7 volumes. I think volume 5 through 11 is what I managed to squeeze in the last couple days of January. If you don't know, this series is about Midoriya, a boy who was born without superpowers, and he suddenly acquires superpowers, and the story kind of follows him as he tries to become the greatest superhero. That's kind of a stripped down summary of the series. There's a lot more to it than that. And this series is just really, really well written. It has some really great characters. So I've been really enjoying it. I've watched the anime as well, but I kind of got impatient and wanted to read in the manga the storylines that haven't been adapted in the anime yet. So that is kind of what I'm doing, like comparing and then also trying to get ahead and see what other kind of adventures that the characters in this series have gotten up to that I haven't seen yet. And that is all 16 books I read in January. Hopefully I'll be able to do as good in February, but we'll see. It is kind of a shorter month, and honestly, I can't believe that I read as much as I did this month. I posted my February TBR a couple weeks ago, so if you want to see what I'm going to be reading in February, you can check that out, and I will be back at the beginning of March to let you guys know how all of those books were for me. Next week, I will be back with a video where I talk about cosmic horror and why I love it, and give you guys some recs for some of the best cosmic horror books. And I might even throw some movies and games in there. We'll have to see. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you guys have read any of these books. What did you think? And if you haven't read any of them, have any of them caught your eye and made your list? Let me know which ones you think that you'll be reading in the future. And I will see you guys again next week. Bye.